Hi, today we're going to be doing a load balancer packet walkthrough so that we can understand how the load balancer manages connection from the client through the load balancer to the application server. And we're going to start by making a couple designations. So here we have the client, and it's going to be using the client IP address. The load balancer is going to have a virtual IP address, and the server is going to have its server IP address. We're going to be doing this based on TCP. It's the most popular protocol that we see on the network today. We have UDP also, and we'll discuss the differences in UDP, but it's very similar. But first, we're going to do a TCP handshake, the three-way handshake, SYN, SYN-ACK, ACK. So the client is going to make a connection to the application server, but it's actually making a connection to the load balancer through the virtual IP address. So we have a connection going from the client IP going to the virtual IP address. And we have a TCP SYN, and the load balancer is not going to send anything to the application server yet. The load balancer is going to respond with the SYN-ACK. And then to complete the handshake, the client is going to send the ACK. So we have a three-way handshake, connection is completed, nothing to the server yet. Now the client is also at this point probably going to be sending its data. At least the first piece of data, like an HTTP GET if it's the HTTP protocol. At this point in time, the load balancer is going to say, okay, I have a complete connection. It is a valid client. I am now going to open a connection to the server. So the load balancer is going to make that three-way handshake to the server, and it's going to be either using the client IP address, if it's using the transparent mode, or if it's doing source NAT, it's going to be using the load balancer IP address, and it's going to be sending the traffic to the server IP. And we have that three-way handshake. And then the load balancer will then, once that's established, go ahead and send that data. Again, this data could be like an HTTP 1.1 GET. And then the server is going to send its response data, like the web page. The load balancer is going to take that data, take these IP addresses, and do the NAT, network address translation, and send that data to the client using the client IP and the virtual IP address as the destination and source. So it's doing IP translation for the entire connection. And this is going to go on back and forth until this connection is done, and then we'll have the TCP close. And there is a sequence of packets for the TCP close. And once that is done, then the connection is done. So you can see here, the load balancer is doing that IP translation for every single packet between the client through the VIP to the server and the server's IP address. In addition, because it's doing this translation, it's actually doing sequence number translation and more things to make sure that this connection stays established. So how is this different from UDP? UDP, there is no handshake. So the client sends UDP packet goes through the load balancer and immediately gets sent to the server. The server responds appropriately with UDP response and back and forth. So it's real-time streaming, for example, or if you're doing some sort of video, chances are you're going to see one packet coming from the client, a lot of packets coming from the server, and occasional packets coming from the client, etc. But same situation, going back and forth, and then the UDP connection is done. There's no closed sequence. It's just done. And the load balancer and the server have to have some sort of timeout model to say, okay, I'm assuming this session is done for UDP because I haven't seen anything in the past 30 seconds, 300 seconds, whatever is configured on the load balancer for that timeout session for UDP. So here you can see how the load balancer manages the traffic from the client through the virtual IP address to the server and the packet walkthrough to understand exactly what is going on and how it manages this for all the connections going through the load balancer.